Hey, hello and welcome to Screen Fever. My name is Adam Barnard and I'm joined by Jackson Smith, and today we're going to take a little trip down memory lane of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It has been 10 years since things kicked off with Iron Man, and now in 2018 we are right on the verge of Infinity War being released, and I think both of us were really interested to take a little bit of time to reflect on some of the most exciting chapters of the last decade of Marvel movies.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has happened in 10 years, both in terms of the world and in terms of our lives. And what's so special about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, particularly to me, is that everybody kind of has their own experience with it. Everybody kind of has their own movie that they respond to most. So I'm excited to sort of see what that movie is or what those movies are for you, Adam, and sort of explore my own memories and see what I responded to over the last decade.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's tough for me to grasp this, but I almost feel like Marvel might be like the Star Wars for the people who grew up with this generation. And I mean, if I was born 3 or 4 years later, I might be in that category. And don't get me wrong, I've always been a Star Wars kid, but like this kind of coherent storytelling, and it's crossing so many different platforms or so many different individual characters' movies or journeys through their own trilogies, like with the Guardians or with Iron Man. Like it's very interactive. And like you said, if you like something, it's okay for you not to like something else because another person might really connect with that other movie. Like some people just don't like Thor but love Iron Man, and some people think Iron Man is too cheesy and like the mythology of Thor. So it's really that diversity of storytelling to me that has made the MCU so rich, and now we're seeing that fully realized in one movie with Infinity War.
It's really funny that you mentioned Star Wars, actually, because I think that's a really good point of reference when it comes to talking about a lot of the good movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, for instance, my first experience seeing Guardians of the Galaxy was what I felt was akin to someone in 1977 seeing Star Wars for the
Yeah.
first time. Similarly speaking, a lot of African American kids seeing Black Panther for the first time this February was probably akin to that experience as well. And I think that is being provided by a singular franchise is unprecedented.
Yeah, and the same producer for all the
So
movies. I
yeah,
mean, that's
wow.
insane. I don't know how he looks so young and how he stays so fresh. I mean, when does he take a vacation? Because they have major releases every year, so
Oh my
it's
gosh.
really
It's a good
a
question.
sight to behold. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and start with Iron Man, and as a highlight, it's very interesting. I never connected with this as much as everyone else did. I think it is very important because it is the first superhero movie that kind of bridged like a post 9/11 world with the idea of superheroes, because in the 70s or the 60s, you have Christopher Reeve, you have all these different characters, or it's all these different actors playing superheroes, and the tone is very distinct. And we grew up in a different world, and it was up to filmmakers to try to decide how to usher superhero storytelling into a new era. And for me, even if I didn't love it, I feel like Iron Man was the first time it landed very well.
Yeah, well, what Marvel has always done, not just as a filmmaking body, but also as a, comic book publisher, is injecting superheroes with a level of humanity. And I think what was really unprecedented about Iron Man at the time wasn't necessarily its grittiness or the fact that it was setting up the Avengers, although those were key points in what made it special. I think what it was is that Tony Stark was kind of a jerk, and he was kind
Yeah.
of a jerk in a way that was fun to watch and somewhat relatable, but also kind of uncomfortable. And if you look at a lot of the superhero movies before that, you didn't have that character too much. I mean, the closest thing I can think of was maybe Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, but even then the X-Men movies weren't his movies. They were the X-Men movies.
Certainly, and I might have to walk back an earlier statement just a tad because X-Men did kind of deal with some more modern themes
A little bit,
and
yeah.
stuff, but I don't think that it wasn't this resonant home run that Iron Man was, I think, in the general
Yeah.
populace. Now, that said, for me, my first highlight within the MCU is Captain America, the First Avenger. And that's something interesting because I watched that movie way before I was involved in online fandom, and for me, I thought like this is amazing. Like I grew up watching World War II movies,
Hmm.
and you plant this superhero, and you actually match the two tones. Like one of my favorite scenes or developments in the first Avenger is where Captain America becomes this propaganda figure for the front line, and he just looks at this battle hardened group, and he's like, "Who's ready to sock old Adolf in the jaw?" And no one's buying it. And they made an effort not to be too campy. They made an effort to say this is a war, and Captain America is to an extent being realistically placed in a World War II action movie.
Hmm. Yeah, we don't give those early movies enough credit. Like,
Yeah.
and that was, of course, back when Paramount was still distributing them. This was before the Disney Marvel deal had gone through. And, going back and revisiting those movies, they are so distinct from each other, like the first Captain America movie is so in love with the 40s serial aesthetic, in a different way, but to the way something like Thor felt very bizarre and surreal and operatic. The first Thor movie, I mean, and I think the downside of the current Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I use downside in air quotes because the movies have been very consistently good. But the downside is that a lot of the movies have sort of lost their individual personality. Like what made the Avengers special when it came out was the fact that you had all these characters from these movies and dissonant genres all in the same place. It was this fascinating melting pot of stuff. And by
Yeah.
now, as excited as we all are for Infinity War, it is kind of like, it's an Avengers movie now. Like we've come to expect this kind of,
Right.
crossover cocktail superhero, whatever.
It's its own kind of story, I think. Or its own kind of story that's being told these big crossover movies. And I'll tell you what was really interesting with the first Avenger or the Captain America movie is once he died or quote died,
Yeah.
I was I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I knew it felt like there needed to be some kind of epilogue. And again, I have to express I was not let in on the secret of the MCU being developed. I just thought I was watching a Captain America
Captain
movie.
America,
And
yeah.
so all of a sudden he wakes up 60 years later and Nick Fury is there, who I saw in another Iron Man movie, and I thought, what the hell is going on? Like this is modern time. That's like I thought the DVD had another movie attached on the end. I was like, what how the hell did this happen? And so for me, I guess I got to discover that journey. I got to take that without, looking at all the announcements on Hollywood Reporter or Variety. I got to experience as an audience to see, wow, there's going to be more of this, and it's all going to tie in, and we're going to take you for a ride that has never been done before in cinema history.
It's been very hard to replicate that. And I feel like that's what everybody in the industry has been doing over the last decade, is trying to replicate that exact feeling that you just described to me. Like the Dark Universe Mummy movie that came out last year. The whole thing felt like engineered to make you say like, "Oh my gosh, they're going to do a Creature from the Black Lagoon movie. They're going to do a Dracula movie." And the whole thing just came off as feeling like really bland and inauthentic. That was such a unique feeling, and that feeling came at a different time for everybody, but that feeling of like discovering that these characters were part of a bigger world, and that bigger world was ultimately leading to something.
Yeah. So speaking of a bigger world, I want to get your take on the Avengers, because that is just a real landmark in terms of not only Marvel but just movies, blockbusters in the last, decade or so.
Yeah, I mean, when the first Avengers came out, I was in the same boat as everybody. I felt like I was seeing something that had never been done before. I felt like I was experiencing emotions and having reactions to a movie that I hadn't had in movies before. It felt so different, and it felt so fresh. This is the first Avengers movie.
Yeah, the 2012 and the
yeah.
Joss Whedon one, not
Yeah.
Age of Ultron.
Well, it's interesting because Age of Ultron, I very remember distinctly not feeling any of that. I think I walked out of Age of
Exactly.
Ultron being like, I just saw what one might argue a better version of the Avengers. Like, I think there's a lot more cinematic value to Age of Ultron than there is to the original Avengers movie. But all of that positive feeling was gone. I felt like I had just walked out of 2.5 hours of Joss Whedon throwing action figures around, which is like,
Yeah.
the worst thing to sit through. But
Yeah, Age of Ultron, I don't think was any kind of like disastrous sophomore slump. It just was simply growing pains, and I think Feige and Joss Whedon and some of the other directors were still figuring out how to bridge the characters together. And like you have Thor in his little hot tub, and that just randomly happens. And Joss Whedon said I had to set up this, and there was this requirement and this restriction, and I think that was just an instance where everyone was trying to juggle too many ingredients, and thankfully it was just contained to a few missteps. It wasn't some total wipeout.
yeah, I like to think of Civil War as the second Avengers movie that Age of Ultron wasn't, because Civil War, I don't know if it was the same feeling as Avengers, but it definitely instilled that same kind of awe.
It's a sense of wonder, right? It's kind of like a mix of humor and action and spectacle that is heart. If that's one way I could describe it, I think
Exactly.
I'd go with that.
But I think with Civil War, the reason that rung true with me as opposed to Ultron is because it pushed things in a different direction. Ultron was basically, like I said, just a better version of the Avengers, whereas Civil War was like introduced genuine, interesting conflict in and forced the characters to reckon with that. So you were at the same time as having, Spider-Man fight Black Panther, fight, Scarlet Witch, fight Iron Man, fight whatever, you were also having this earth-shattering character drama, which meant things for the movies going forward. And that's why that felt like a special Avengers sequel. I think I at least got to the end of Age of Ultron, and I was like, okay, everybody's going to go back off and they're all going to do their own things, and we're going to come back and do this like 5 years later. Like, okay, yeah, sure. But at the end of Civil War, it was like, oh my gosh, like, what happens now? Where do we go from here? Like, half the people are in jail.
I think when speaking of Captain America movies, I think for us, our first shared experience actually in terms of theater going was with Captain America Winter Soldier. And that was a real highlight for me. I was still at film school and we were both still in the dorms. We lived across from each other. We were starting to get to know each other. I was working on set all weekend, and I think it was a Saturday or something. I was really tired and I wanted to do something fun, and I linked up with you and you said, let's just go see the Captain America movie. And you had seen it, I hadn't seen it, and there was just, again, that sense, in a much darker and thrilling way, that sense of awe, because like as much as I like the first Avenger, the Captain America movie, we're not in the 40s anymore. You can't replicate that whole tone or vibe you get from Captain America, and Winter Soldier was really him learning to fit in the world of espionage, where it's not such a dichotomy between the white hats and the black hats, the good guys and the bad guys. There's Hydra, which is a part of Shield, and Shield in and of its own right is already abusing power, and you have Robert Redford in it, so it's a big throwback to a lot of like 70s thrillers, and which is some stuff I grew up on, which is like espionage thrillers. So I mean, for me, I'm still amazed at how Marvel blends like the action adventure, the quipping, the swashbuckling moments, and breathtaking stunts with this like actual tangible and meaty themes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I said, I think it all comes down to the characters. I think it all comes down to making the characters work. And yeah, echoing your sentiment about Winter Soldier, 2014 was around the time that I started to it was around the time that I started to not pay attention to Marvel movies anymore. It was the year after I had gotten Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World. And I have a soft spot for the Thor movies, but I really didn't like Iron Man 3. So when Winter Soldier came out, I was kind of feeling the slump of the Disney corporate machine, and and within the first 5 minutes of that movie, I was like, I felt such a strong sense of purpose on the part of the filmmakers. I sensed a strong arc for Captain America going forward. I sensed a thrilling and genuinely interesting movie-going experience, and it was a wake-up call. I was like, I think that's probably still one of, if not my favorite Marvel movie. My second, of course, would be the movie that came out directly after that, Guardians of the Galaxy, which, like I said, felt like going to see Star Wars for the first time.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I was, same year, like you said, I was at home. I'd gone back to North Carolina from college, and I was hanging out with a friend just to get coffee, and I was on my phone, I saw, oh my gosh, the new Guardians movie is coming out tonight. So purely on spontaneity, I said, "Hey man, let's stay up till midnight and go watch Guardians." Because I'd seen the trailers, but again, like the Marvel has this thing where I keep thinking it's gonna be crap. Like I keep thinking they're gonna have overstayed their welcome every year. I see the trailers for a movie. I'm like, yeah, it's fine, but is it actually that good? Like, are there other stories or other superheroes to watch on screen? And then I go see the movie and it's fantastic every time,
Yeah.
most times. So
Most
this was
times.
another case. I saw it opening night at midnight. The theater was packed full, and I seriously think to this day it was the most electric and energetic screening or ever viewing experience I've ever shared with other people. I mean, it was magical. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, Guardians is one of the few movies that I've seen 5 times in theaters, which is I'm almost ashamed to say that, but like I'm not, because it really was just so much honest to God fun and cool filmmaking that I wanted to experience it over and over again. And as well, I wanted my friends to experience it. So like every time I saw Guardians, I would bring somebody else who hadn't seen it yet. Like I'd be like, "Oh, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy yet?" "Oh, then let's go see Guardians of the Galaxy." Like the only other movie I think I did that with was probably Mad Max Fury Road. Like just because I felt the need to share this unique and wonderful cinematic experience with other people.
I think that's cool what you brought up because about sharing, because that's when a movie is at its best, that's what you feel. When a movie really resonates with you, it's not enough to have it bring just you joy. You want your friends to be brought the same kind of joy. And like that's kind of like a movie like Star Wars, or even for me, Safety Not Guaranteed, where if someone hasn't seen it, I'd be like, this is like a part of my heart in a way, and like you have to see this and experience the feelings of it. I was really glad to see James Gunn make such a personal movie, especially, he infused the music from his childhood. He made the adventure movie, the kind of adventure movie that Spielberg and Lucas would make, which he grew up watching. I still think to this day it's even a little underrated because it's just so damn magical.
So up till now, we've been kind of talking about the Marvel movies of the past, like the Marvel movies that happened in, phases 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about the Marvel movies that have come out recently, like in the last year, the last 2 years or so. Are there any of those that have rung particularly true to you?
Yeah, actually, one of them really did something personal for me, which was Doctor Strange. And that was a little unexpected because I went through a time in my life where I didn't get to see movies much for some like personal reasons and personal crises I was going through. So I found myself last year needing to catch up with a lot of theatrical releases. And Doctor Strange was on Netflix, and I thought, yeah, like let's check it out. And I guess I'm obligated to, because like I said, I always say it's crap, and I find out it's good, and I see it and I enjoy it. So I figured it'd be good, but to me it was spectacular. Like it's one of my favorite movies, and particularly because you see Doctor Strange deal with loss and health issues and a loss of identity, which is something I've gone through in my own life in a certain sense. And like it was weirdly emotional for me. At some point I forgot it was a superhero movie because I was so involved with Doctor Strange and his own journey, especially as he's discovering the nature of energy and sorcery, and something that's actually not that far away from real science.
Yeah, because Marvel is so good at creating strong characters, those characters resonate with us a lot. Like we've each got a superhero who we can say to some extent, like, "Oh, I know what that feels like," or "Oh, I
Yeah.
know I've lived through something similar to that," so that even though it's all being played out with, wizards and aliens and secret government organizations, it feels very grounded in real human emotion. I think for me, my personal favorite, at least of the last year or so was probably Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, okay.
I always have a soft spot for the Thor movies. I know I kind of touched on this earlier. Like they haven't been particularly good, but they're always a lot of fun. I think Chris Hemsworth has serious movie star charisma. His banter with Tom Hiddleston's always really interesting. And I think Thor Ragnarok was just the played up on all the elements that work so much about that franchise
Sure.
and turned it into something that felt so daring and weird and original. Like,
I really like Thor Ragnarok. I mean, that's
yeah,
not something, just because maybe it didn't resonate with me personally like the other ones I touched on. Like, this movie was really darn good, and it took certain elements of the character and of the Thor trilogy, and it kind of improved on it for me, because I didn't necessarily dislike the mythology or some of the characters or familial ties in the Thor narrative, but for me, like, especially in Dark World, it took itself a little too seriously, and of all the characters to decide not to have fun with and try to make this operatic drama that's a little too self-indulgent, like, I don't think Thor was a wise choice to go with. So for me, I see Ragnarok as like a necessary course correction, because I love Chris Hemsworth, I love Thor, I don't want to ever see those movies die because
yeah.
they're afraid to try something new. So Taika Waititi brought his very, very unique signature humor and just gave a huge boost of adrenaline to the Thor story.
And what I liked about it too is the movie was very much about that kind of conflict. Like the structurally and thematically, I think the movie deals with this idea of old structures being, you know, disassembled, whether those old structures are the Thor franchise itself, whether those old structures are the family BS that the Thor and Loki regularly go through, and those old structures being just pure genre. I mean, like, the movie is so weird in its dialogue, in its shot choices, and like literally everything, that it feels very intentionally designed to tell the audience you're getting something completely different, you know?
So I hesitate to make this comparison, but it feels a bit like The Last Jedi, though, to a
Yeah,
much greater extent. You know, it went much further than The Last Jedi dared to go. And that's because I still think Thor had resonant character moments. Like, there was some stuff
really
that
did,
I found myself getting emotional with. I'm like, hold on. Like, I was laughing and in stitches, and, you know, I felt like I was watching a very self-aware Thor movie, which was great. And then all of a sudden it gets so real with some of the family stuff. So it's just a very expertly balanced movie.
Totally.
Well, okay, thank you for joining us for this special discussion. Really excited to do this. I hope we get to do more, and truthfully, I hope in the 10 years from now we get to link up again and discuss the next decade of the Marvel Universe.
Because we know it will be still going on a decade.
At least, at the very least. Well, anyways, I'm Adam.
I'm Jackson.
And thanks for joining us today.